It marks 7 years since 34 miners were killed by the police during a strike over wages at Lonmin. Retired Judge Ian Farlam was subsequently appointed to preside over a commission of inquiry into the Marikana killings. We cross to Cape Town now, where we get Judge Farlam's views on progress made to implement his recommendations. Judge, thanks a lot for joining us this morning. I mean, looking at where we've come 7 years on, it appears as though, unfortunately, no accountability has been taken in terms of exactly who gets to answer for those miners who were actually killed. What are your views on that?
Well, good morning to you. Yes, the extraordinary thing is that one of the recommendations which we made, and the government accepted all our recommendations as far as I understand, was that a special panel of investigators be appointed by the DPP, presided over by a senior state advocate, to investigate the matter, to get evidence so that prosecutions could be instituted, because most of the evidence we got from the individual shooters was inadmissible in terms of the regulations. What they told us couldn't be used against them in evidence. So we said they must appoint their own investigators, get evidence that can be used, and then prosecute. I understand the panel was appointed. Dr. Pretorius, who was a senior state advocate, is appointed to chair it. I take it, but I don't know what happened thereafter. I did hear that they had applied for funds which they didn't get, but it may be that the funds have since been made available. But certainly nothing has happened. I don't know whether anything is happening. One of the other problems relating to our report, which is linked to what you asked me about, is that though the government said they'd accepted our recommendations, they haven't really said anything about what they're doing to implement them. I think the public deserves to know what exactly they have done in relation to implementation, what they haven't done, the reasons why they haven't done certain things. It's a public matter of great importance.
I mean, obviously speak about the fact that it is a public matter, it is of great importance. Does that not also agitate you? And not even agitate, I would, in my opinion, I would be extremely aggrieved knowing the fact that I presided over this matter, I had to chair this entire commission, there were lives that were lost, and 7 years on, nothing has actually been done in terms of where accountability is taken. So number one, it's almost as if your time was wasted, but also another issue around the respect of those individuals who had to lose their lives for 12,500 rand.
Yes, no, that's absolutely correct. Of course, we must also consider, though, in this context, that there are two sides to the story. Remember, there were 34 people were killed 7 years ago today, on the Thursday, the 16th. In the run-up to that period, from the previous Sunday, another 10 people died. 3 of them were strikers. There were 2 policemen. There were 2 workers who were not striking and who were actually clearly killed because they were striking. So, and that was really the spark that caused the conflagration. Of course, ultimately, the way the police reacted to it was totally unacceptable. We criticised them in very strong terms, and certainly those involved in the unacceptable behaviour should be dealt with. But we must also remember that the problem started, as far as killings were concerned, on the Sunday, when 2 security guards working for Lonmin were murdered by strikers. I want to make clear, I'm not suggesting for a moment that all, even the vast majority of the strikers could be held liable, but certainly some were. 2 were killed. One of them had his tongue removed from his body, which we found was later used for muti. And that created an atmosphere which you can understand got totally out of control. Then that night, a gentleman who came to work at one of the shafts about 9 o'clock was murdered, rather savagely stabbed a number of times. The following morning at 4 o'clock, another one on the way to work was murdered. And then later that day, the Monday, there was an incident with the police when 3 strikers died and 2 policemen were killed. So the police clearly had a very serious problem on their hands. They tried to deal with it the correct way by negotiating with the strikers. One of the problems they had was that Lonmin wouldn't cooperate in making certain concessions that would have helped the police to do what they were trying to do. There's another death on the Tuesday, and the police, meanwhile, worked out a good plan to deal with the situation reasonably peacefully. The problem they had, of course, further was the miners were congregating every day on the kopje. Some of them were so-called kopje. Some of them were staying there overnight. They were not exercising their rights under the Constitution. You know, under the Constitution, everyone, I'm quoting Section 17 of the Bill of Rights, everyone has the right peacefully and unarmed to assemble, demonstrate, to picket, and to present petitions. But of course, they weren't assembling peacefully, and they weren't unarmed, which created the problem. But the police, as I say, had a good plan to deal with it. Unfortunately, they deviated from the plan on the Thursday morning. They couldn't use the plan for reasons that I explain if you want to know, but it's not necessarily to the present point. They created a situation where they decided to act on the Thursday, but they never told us why. Because they decided to act on the Thursday, it was inevitable, and they foresaw this because they ordered 4 hearses and 4,000 extra rounds of ammunition. It was inevitable that there'd be bloodshed, and of course the bloodshed followed. But the point to be made is, while we think of the 34 people who were massacred on the Thursday, we mustn't forget the people who were killed in the run-up to that period, including policemen, security guards, and non-striking workers.
Judge, let me ask you this question. I mean, a lot of times the Commission of Inquiry was criticized for exonerating some political figures. I mean, the key figures that come to mind was then Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa, Police Minister Natim Tetwa, former Mineral Resources Minister, that's Susan Shabangu. Do you still stand by those recommendations in terms of exonerating those political figures? Because, unfortunately, that shadow has not left either of them, including now President Cyril Ramaphosa.
Yes, no, I accept it. But let me correct at one point. We didn't exonerate the Minister of Police. We found in the case of the Minister of Police that the evidence it wasn't a strong enough case to find that he had acted improperly, but equally, there wasn't a strong enough case going the other way. So we specifically said that while we didn't make a finding against him, we couldn't make a finding in his favor either. And this was presented as exoneration. It wasn't exoneration. You know, it's an important point. I'll get to the other political figures in a moment. Important point to remember in this context is a commission isn't there just to give its opinions without more. Its function is to hear evidence, weigh the evidence, sift it and analyze it, and then in the end make findings based on the evidence, and that's what we did. If you go through our report, you'll see every finding is accompanied by a footnote where we refer to the evidence upon which we rely. Some people seem to think, well, because we didn't make the findings that they would have liked us to have made, of course, which in accordance with what they themselves believed had happened, then we acted improperly. In fact, it would have been the other way. It is very important to be able to base every to base every fact finding on evidence. Now, let me come to the politicians you talk about. I've mentioned this to Tetwa. As far as Mr. Ramaphosa was concerned, we went through the evidence very fully. In fact, it's quoted. All the relevant facts are quoted in detail in the report. And we came to the conclusion that the criticism of Mr. Ramaphosa was not well founded, and we so found. We considered all the arguments raised against him, and for the reasons that we fully spelled out in the report, we didn't accept them. The other minister, I think, who was criticised was Minister Shabangu, who was the Minister of Mineral Resources. The same thing applied there. The facts very shortly were that there was this incident on the Sunday, which I mentioned, where security guards were killed. The police had been warned that there was trouble to be expected at Lonmin. They drew up a plan which they never implemented, and they weren't there when the killings took place. This caused a great deal of concern on the part of Lonmin and the National Union of Mine Workers, the majority union at that point. And so Mr. Ramaphosa, who was a non-executive director of Lonmin, was asked by the Lonmin directors, and Mr. Sikalala, I think his name was, who's now cabinet minister, who was the head of NUM, was asked by the NUM people to speak to the minister and say, please, can't the police do something about it and come on the scene and assist to restore law and order? We heard evidence from both the Minister of Police and Mr. Ramaphosa and Mr. Sikalala. All they said was essentially that. They didn't say what must happen. They simply said the police should deal with the matter properly and be present. I would like to think that even if they hadn't spoken to the minister, that there would have been the same kind of reaction once it was quite clear what was happening. But we've been criticised by people who I don't think have fully read the relevant section in the report. If they disagreed with the reasoning, then they'll say so. But you can't just say we were wrong without saying why we were wrong. And people must understand that a commissioner can only make findings based on the evidence. So that's my answer to your question.
Judge, we're going to leave it there for this morning, but thanks a lot for joining us and shedding some light in terms of perhaps the thinking and the conceptualizing of those recommendations as put forward by the Farlam Commission. That was retired Judge Ian Farlam, who chaired the Commission of Inquiry into the Marikana killings.